Hey everyone, my name is Renee Miller. I'm the program director for the OBI, and I'm so glad to have you with us here today. Welcome to this educational program on how accelerators can help boost your startup. At the bottom of your screen should be a chat icon, so please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat if you haven't already. And during the presentation, if you have questions for the panel, please use that chat box to ask your questions, and we'll be doing questions and answering as we go along. So I'm super glad to have you with us here today. I'd like to tell you about some upcoming events that we have going on. Have you heard about AO Bio? It is a new program. It is part investment readiness education and investment for entrepreneurs, and it's part investment for angel investors. And AO Bio begins next week on February 23rd, and there will be a link to it in the chat. And so please go to that link to learn more about it and to register. Then we have on March 3rd is our next happy hour. It is another virtual happy hour, and there will be a link to it in the chat so you can register for that. It's March 3rd from 5 to 6:30 p.m. And then in a month, on March 15th, we have another Lunch and Learn panel, and it is called Women in Leadership, Mind the Gap. And we have a great panel for that event, and we're really looking forward to discussing it. Okay, so to get us started, I would like to offer a land acknowledgement. OBI and Otrati would like to acknowledge the land we're all on, wherever we may be. Otrati conducts business throughout Portland and beyond, and is making an effort to acknowledge the history of the area and work towards decolonization of the bioscience industry. Portland rests on traditional village sites of the Multnomah, Cathlamet, Clackamas, Chinook, Tualatin, Kalapuya, Molalla, and many other tribes who have made their homes along the Columbia River. So please join us in acknowledging the land we're all on throughout Portland, or Oregon and beyond. And to learn more about Portland's native, diverse, and vibrant community, please read Leading with Tradition, a document created by the Portland Indian Leaders Roundtable. And there's a link to it in the chat box. All right, we have a fantastic panel here with us today. And many of you probably know them already as active members of the health innovation community in Portland. First off, our moderator is Charla Triplett. She has over 20 years experience bridging the gap between academia, business, startups, nonprofits, and venture capital. Charla's trained as a bioengineer with experience in digital health, biosensors, medtech, and life sciences. Charla has been a mentor, advisor, and connector in the industry for decades, most recently as the president of Catalyze, a consulting group. She's a senior venture partner at Expert Dojo Healthcare Ventures, a managing director of Suncoast Ventures, and CEO of Spine by Design, an OHSU medical device spinout. She's a busy woman. Next up, we have David Farrell. He's a professor at OHSU. Dr. Farrell's passionate about bringing scientific discoveries from the lab bench to the patient's bedside. His research interests involve the mechanism of blood clotting and how this leads to heart attacks and strokes. He has 4 decades of biomedical research experience, and he was elected as Fellow of the American Heart Association for these research contributions. He's also training the next generations of physicians and scientists as a course director in the Foundations of Medicine curriculum for first-year medical students at OHSU. Dave's company, Gamma Diagnostics, is an OBI startup company. And Candice Smith. She founded Caregiven following the death of her father, and inspired to change the experiences for all family caregivers. Caregiven's mobile app and platform was launched in April 2020, and is the only digital-first caregiver engagement platform that aggregates the medical, legal, financial, logistical, and emotional aspects of caring for an aging or an ailing adult. Caregiven is also one of OBI's startup companies. Prior to founding Caregiven, Candice spent over 20 years overseeing alumni, development, and public relations for colleges and universities in the US and in Australia. A graduate of the University of Oregon, Candice lives in Portland with her family and maintains residency in Australia. So welcome, Charla, Dave, and Candice. If you have questions for our speakers, again, please type them into the chat. And with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Charla and Dave and Candice.
Hello, all. Very excited to be talking to you today about accelerators. When I had the idea for putting this together, I realized that I obviously work for an accelerator, so there's that aspect of it, but that I have seen so many startups make big leaps and bounds by going through Accelerator, including the two founders that we have here today. And my own startup has actually gone through an accelerator. We are actually a spin out of OSU, not OHSU. I think that may have been a typo on my part. Just wanted to throw that out there just so OSU does not get their feelings hurt on that side, although we've been partnering with OHSU. I'm going to go ahead and throw up a slide with some accelerators, and I'm going to speak for just about 2 or 3 minutes about sort of what they are and how there's all different flavors of accelerators. So I'm going to share my screen here. Let's see. Is it sharing? Sorry,
Not yet.
Not yet.
Oh, there it goes.
There we go. All right. So sorry, I had Canva to PowerPoint mishap. So this is my best way to share. So you've probably recognized some of the accelerators on this list. Some of them you may not know about. I really threw up startup accelerators that I think are specifically valuable to healthcare companies, and ones that are more widely known, for example, like Techstars and Y Combinator. And so startup accelerators are a relatively new phenomena, is my understanding, that they sort of, Y Combinator kind of invented the concept, and they've, although I'm sure there were some forms of these long before that, but from an investment perspective in particular. So what you see here is a list of accelerators that all have different ways of helping support startups, and they typically tend to come in at different times. So there are startups like creative accelerators like Creative Destruction Labs, which can help at earlier stages. They can also help potentially at later stages, or startups like Expert Dojo, which is the accelerator that I support and help run, where we're focused more on growth. So we're really looking at not sort of what do you want to be when you grow up, which is what a lot of startup accelerators sort of help focus on, and getting that sort of business case nailed down. And we'll discuss with the panelists today, but some of these give you money, some don't. Some are, 2 months, some are 3 months, some like Expert Dojo, we work with companies over the course of 3 years. So just do your homework as it relates to accelerators. And we're going to dive a little bit deeper in with the founders here today about their own experiences and what they've seen in their accelerators, and be able to answer any questions that you might have around broadly about participating in accelerators and the value that it brings to companies. And one last note I just wanted to mention, I see startups doing multiple accelerators, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. In fact, I know for sure Candice has done multiple. And so I'm going to stop sharing my screen and open it up with having both Dave and Candice introduce themselves and maybe give a little snapshot of what made you decide to do an accelerator to start with. And then that's a great place to start. Candice, you want to go first?
I was going to ask you, who do you want to go first?
I'll pick on you.
So I will go first. So I'm Candice Smith. Thank you both for the introduction. And yes, I've done 2 accelerators that were equity accelerators, and I did them for very different reasons. So I participated in the Women's Startup Lab in 2019. And the reason why I chose that accelerator was it was focused on tech, female leaders, and getting an introduction into the Silicon Valley, where all the money is. Everybody knows all the money's in the Valley. So in exchange for 3% equity in my company, I went down and I spent 2 weeks in the Valley, which was very illuminating. Later in 2020, I was selected to participate in the Global Insurance Accelerator. And I am a digital health / insurtech startup that is finding greater product market fit with non-health insurers. And so that opportunity, which again took equity in my company, but also contributed $75,000 on a safe, very different criteria for why I chose to participate in that program. So I can happily talk about, both types, what we experience going through an accelerator, and how to make the most of the opportunity. But I'll stop there.
That's a great introduction. Dave, do you want to speak to your experience in terms of going through the accelerator? I think you also did VIP as well, correct? Am I correct?
The OHSU.
Yeah. Okay.
So to understand the route we've traveled, you have to know that our company is a story of birth, death, and rebirth. So we started in 2009 as Gamma Therapeutics, and died somewhat after that when the company that we were partnering with went bankrupt and was indicted for Medicare fraud and sued by all their investors. So, we did a full stop, let's reboot. So I think had I been aware of accelerators at that point, that would have been a perfect opportunity for us to have pivoted and gotten the help we needed to get us off the ground. Instead, what happened is we just languished and flailed for a while. And it really wasn't until Charla came and introduced us to Expert Dojo that we got back on track. And that has led to a lot of good things that's happened so far. And so Expert Dojo, especially for me being the non-business person, their course has been illuminating. Now, of course, yes, they did invest in our company, but it wasn't just like, oh, here's some money, now go fly. And that I think is the, more the traditional angel investor. It's like, here, take my money and we'll do a safe, and then I'm expecting you to do something. That wasn't what happened. So, we went through this course, as Charla's alluded to, and it touched on a whole lot of different facets of starting a company, many of which I was completely unaware. For one thing, they talked about the importance of marketing and the social media influence of that, because, I'm an old guy, right? I don't do social media. I don't have a Facebook page. I'm lucky to have a LinkedIn account. That's about as down and dirty as I get with social media. Don't do Twitter. And they were right. I mean, they had just a couple of exercises we would do. And I was surprised at the number of responses. I thought, wow, do people actually have time to look at my LinkedIn? This seems crazy. And besides that sort of stuff, they also put us in front of investors, a lot of angel pitch sessions. They helped us hone our pitch to hopefully perfection. At least it was a heck of a lot better than it was when it started. I know that. And so they gave us a whole lot of background training that, besides the investment money, really, I think has helped launch us in the direction that we're going now. And I thank Charla for getting us down that path.
Thanks, Dave. I know you've kind of given a little bit of your experience. Maybe Candice, you can kind of follow on with talking a little bit about your experience in the two different accelerators and kind of where you were at in your company when you went into each one of them.
Absolutely. So I think from my point of view, there are two types generally of accelerators. There are accelerator programs that you join to raise capital. That's the Techstars, the Y Combinator. They're really grooming you for a demo day in which you make them look good by being the greatest thing ever that has been brought to market, of which you get Y Combinator 21 or whatever associated with. Then there are the accelerators that really help startups get product market fit. They're more niche. And so I tend to look at accelerator programs as, are you on a path to venture or are you on a path to revenue? And I think that that is one of the first questions any founder needs to really think about as they are moving forward, because that then differentiates the type of accelerator programs out there. So originally, when I was bootstrapping a solo founder, I just barely had some wireframes and some initial marketing. I thought I was on the path to venture. And that's why I chose the Women's Startup Lab. First time founder, Portland, Oregon, not a lot of money headed in my direction, and the bright shining lights of Silicon Valley just down the street. So I went down there for two purposes. One is to refine the pitch and learn the mechanics of what needs to be done to sell your company to investors. And then, the obvious thing, and Dave mentioned this, is to speak to people, to, network, and start laying the foundation so that when we were actually raising capital, I wasn't new to them. So that type of experience taught me a lot. And it taught me, as a founder, I wanted to be on a path to revenue, which is why I chose the Global Insurance Accelerator when I did, because that program was more about product market fit within a niche industry. So the demo day wasn't how fabulous we were, but it was how fabulous we were to really fit into the channel in which I ultimately would have revenue and ultimately have sales. And so I think all accelerators at a high level do a little bit of the same type of work. Do you have a business model canvas? What is your marketing plan? What is your company culture? And really the building blocks of what a robust company needs to look like and think about, and help you build towards that. And then you get into the true specifics of, am I trying to walk away with a pilot? Am I trying to walk away with a proof of concept or first customer or investors? Or in my case, with the Global Insurance Accelerator, it was proof of concept and then unlocking all of the institutional investment from those customers. I'll stop there. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that's great. And I just want to point out what's interesting. And I'll do this one plug related to how Expert Dojo is different, because I didn't dive into that. We actually believe that revenue is the path to venture. So from our perspective, growth is always going to drive investment. So if you are getting customers, the money will follow, right? And so our entire mindset related to working with companies, it's a little bit of a struggle, because in healthcare, you may or may not be able to have a quick path to market, right? You might have to do some unpaid pilots. You might have to do some other things in order to get there. But for us, it's about growth trajectory, which is a little bit different than a lot of the accelerators, right? So like our focus is on getting you to that revenue path and really helping drive sales and understanding that. But I agree 100% of, there are a lot of accelerators where it's like, work with you for 3 months, there's a big splash of a demo day, and then that's kind of your coming out party kind of a thing. And there are many great ones that are very niche to help you sort of get directly connected to your customer. And I highly recommend that as well, because I think that can be super critical. I've also heard of brand accelerators, which one of my companies went through. And so, sorry about that. That's my cat chiming in. So Dave, let me think. So from my perspective, can you speak a little bit to, what is the most important thing that you think that you learned outside of social media during your time at the Accelerator? How important it is to have a LinkedIn page?
Yeah, I think what you just touched on was really one of the most important things, that revenue drives investment. And this, in my naivete, being, a pie in the sky scientist and not a business person, I had thought that, oh, well, if you build it, they will come, right? It's such a great idea. They have to see it. They'll invest. No, they won't. You know, they want to see traction. They want to see that you actually have a revenue stream and that somebody else, independent third parties, think that you've got a good idea. And I think that was probably the most important single part. And their focus on how do you get to revenue? You know, what's the low-hanging fruit? How can you get revenue? And sometimes in biotech, that's not a straightforward path, especially if you have regulatory issues you have to overcome, like FDA, you know, the elephant in the room. And so it made me think about other ways of getting to revenue that while we're working towards FDA clearance, we can still make money. And as it turns out, because we're working on a diagnostic test, there are routes you can do that with where it doesn't have to be FDA cleared. You have to be careful about how you advertise it, because if you start making medical claims, FDA will come right in and stop you. But there's all kinds of other avenues that this could be used in, and some of them have to do with, for example, wellness. And there you can be a little vague about, you know, what it does for you. It's sort of the dance that the you know, over-the-counter meds do. You know, they can't say this cures cancer, you know, but they can make claims about how it allows you to be healthier and things of that. So kind of generalities. And so, you know, being able to use our diagnostic test in that arena, we don't have to go through the severe regulatory hoops and jumping that you would to get, like, say, a clinical lab approved for Quest Diagnostics, for example. And so I think that for me was really quite the education to think outside of, you know, the traditional linear path. We're going to get to here, we're going to make a diagnostic, we're going to get FDA clearance, and then we're going to sell to all the hospital labs in the world. No, let's branch out a little bit before we even get to that fork in the road of FDA and look at other ways we can make revenue before we go that route. So yeah, that to me was important.
Candice asked a really great question. It'd be great if people are willing to put into chat the kind of companies that they are, because I think that really matters too, right? So if you're on a medical device path, there are like Jumpstart Foundry, medtech innovators. There are some really great programs that can help, you know, provide that support network. One of the things that I want to bring up is that there's a lot of money out there and there's a lot of actually competition for startups into accelerators. I know that sounds crazy, but it's true, right? We think about it as founders of like competing for money, right? But on the other side, they are competing for all the great startups that are out there, right? And so one of the questions that I wanted to ask, looks like we've got some FDA path, pre-revenue, drug development. Looks like more of the fitness or the sort of nutritional wellness kind of area. And that's the thing about this area, is that it's so broad. So, you know, if you're a digital health company and your target is, for example, insurance companies, or if your target is employers or, you know, the consumer, for example, there may be, you know, what you want to think about in an accelerator is, what value do they bring to the table outside of money? And so that being said, and how you evaluate that, Candice, can you speak a little bit to your thoughts on giving away equity and like what value that brings to the table versus what you give away, what that feels like, how scary that is, and how you ultimately make the decisions or negotiations with an accelerator?
Yeah, absolutely. First, what Dave was saying too, when you think about an accelerator, it is a validation point in the trajectory of your company. So being selected to participate in an accelerator, you know, it serves a really good purpose. You get a lot of energy behind it. And so having that validation itself opens a lot of doors for you. So the question, of course, is giving away equity and not. Or how do you even approach it? So in my first accelerator, I gave away equity to the accelerator. And I don't regret it because I still have many of the same mentors or stakeholders. 4 years later, read my newsletter, open doors. So that in itself was valuable. The regret I have there is some of these accelerators, and in this example, out of sight, out of mind. And so while they're still on my cap table, and when I need to do a major move with my company, I need to go back and play nice to somebody who hasn't thought about me really in 4 years, except when I win an award and then they claim me for as their own. That I should have been smarter about vetting the program. So on the flip side, and there was no money exchange. I gave them equity for my company. They gave me connections. So in the case of the Global Insurance Accelerator, it was an investment on a safe note for equity in my company. But I was astute enough to know that in this accelerator, it's funded by who funds the accelerator, right? So the accelerator doesn't wake up one day and say, I'm going to bring in 5 companies and I've got 500,000. There's money behind that accelerator. And so who owns your company in exchange for that safe agreement? And so that was something I calculated in, because I have 10 major insurance carriers who own a piece of my company. And that I'm able to leverage when I'm talking to them and saying, okay, principal, you already are invested in my success. Let's have a conversation now how we can take it to the next level. So it's not just this idea of what will this program do for me today? How will it accelerate my growth? But how do you then pivot and maximize that so that it isn't out of sight, out of mind, that they are constantly reminded that their success is a little bit dependent on your success, or at least their financial return.
That's great. Dave, I wanted to speak to something else that I highly recommend you do when you're joining Accelerator. I'm sure, Candice, you probably did that. And that is talk to somebody who's gone through it. So Dave, I know, for example, you spoke to Biotesserae recently. Can you talk a little bit about that experience in terms of, we had a company that we were looking to bring into our accelerator. They reached out and had a conversation with Dave about his experience prior to deciding to join.
Yeah, and I tried to be, as honest and forthcoming as I could, because, I felt that, it was my responsibility, to tell them just what I saw. And I don't know if they've decided to participate.
Yeah, they're in. So thanks.
Oh, they
whatever
did?
You told them, good, bad, and indifferent. But I wanted to bring it up because I think often this doesn't happen. And I think it's really important for you to ask the accelerator if you can speak to an alumni so that you can better understand, their experience in that. And they should offer that up to you. So. Yeah.
Wow. Maybe I'm a good snake oil salesman. I have no idea. I missed my calling.
I think in this particular case, and this is something, we have 2 very different founders here, right? So Candice comes from a background, not science and engineering, didn't bring that to the table. I know many of you here might be scientific or technical founders. That's another thing to really be aware of. So thinking about, Candice, you were the CEO, Dave, you were actually a CSO, and maybe speaking to Candice, I don't know if, I think this was pre-Rebecca when you went through Global Insurance Accelerator, but we did have a question beforehand about building teams and sort of how that relates, and maybe how teams integrate into accelerators and what you're thinking about related to that. So do you want to speak a little bit, Candice, to how you decided to build your team? And if you were to go through an accelerator today, what would that look like? What would that look like different from, from where you were at before, right? As a solo founder, sort of on this journey on your own.
Yeah. So when you're a solo founder going through an accelerator, it's a lot because there's such a diversity of content that the accelerator programs, want to introduce you to, whether it's sales, whether it's marketing, whether it's product development or features. And so you do have to be really a jack or a Jill of all trades when you're going through an accelerator, and really articulate at least to yourself, what you're hoping to get out of the program at the end of it. And so, as Charla said, I was a solo founder when I went into the accelerator. I came out of the Global Insurance Accelerator, and I had a CTO local, but again, being selected by an accelerator program was a validation point enough for her to join the team. And then one of the things that we've touched on already is the value of the alumni network, the value of the mentors and the introductions. That is really the priceless bit of an accelerator. So in my own journey, our company's chief revenue officer joined Caregiven. He was a mentor to another company going through the program, and he was a chief marketing officer at a major carrier, believed in my vision, believed in our momentum, and came to us. Took a risk on a startup. I would never have had the opportunity to recruit an individual like this so early in our company trajectory were it not for the program. And the year before in the Global Insurance Accelerator, a board member left their company to join as a co-founder of, again, a pre-revenue, pre-product startup. So you never know who is going to come into your network, and you never know how far the ripple effect will last. So going into it with the idea of leveraging every relationship and maximizing it will give it the legs. And a lot of people, at least in our case, we didn't have the capacity to be hiring a lot of employees early on. So these mentors, once they are committed to your vision and mission, a couple hours here and a couple hours there, over a few months is invaluable when that person is chief marketing officer at Standard Insurance and they're giving you their time. I mean, I couldn't hire that on Upworks, right? So don't ever undervalue that sort of leadership. They may not be the actual team, but you can create a team through mentors. Did that answer you?
It did. And I want to address a point that somebody had addressed me in chat. The difference between an incubator, for example, like Otrati sort of incubator space, and an accelerator, right? Otrati actually has its own sort of mentorship program, which is I probably quasi between an incubator and an accelerator, where it's not necessarily a direct program with cohorts, but you do have cohorts that get matched with individual mentors, is my understanding. Incubators tend to be earlier on in a company's formation and tend to be a place in which often there's a physical place associated with that. It allows you to be around other companies. Dave, my understanding is that VIP in my mind is a little bit more like an incubator space, right? So do you want to speak a little bit about how you went from being a scientist at OHSU to having some of these ideas and the early stage support that you got from the VIP program that helped you figure out, what is IP? How do I get, that kind of stuff? Do you want to speak a little bit to that?
Sure. Yeah. So the I always forget what BIP stands for, Biomedical Innovation Program.
That's
something.
my understanding. Yeah.
Something like that, which came out of the Tech Transfer Department at OHSU, and it was originally started, probably a decade or more ago. As a way of commercializing translational research coming out of the labs at OHSU. And so it was a program where they would, and in some cases, invest actual dollars into. In fact, I just applied for another one for $40,000 back in January, still waiting to hear. And so it was really a way of getting money in order to be able to get to proof of concept or get to prototype within OHSU, so that you would have the basis of what then could become a company, and you'd have intellectual property that could be patented. And that's a big focus at OHSU, is that before they're going to put any money towards an idea like that, they want to make sure that it's something that they can get patent protection on. And that is, kind of their lens that they see projects through. It's not like, oh, golly gee whiz, isn't this a great idea? No, it's golly gee whiz, can this be patented? And could this become a company? And so we did take advantage of that. The other thing that we took advantage of was there was actually a program at Portland State University that was run by Melissa Appleyard. And Dr. Appleyard had this program called Lab to Market, Lab to Market. And she brought in people from DFJ Frontier down in the Bay Area, and they had a whole week course, 8 hours a day, Monday through Friday. And that was just fantastic. I learned a lot on that program as well. You know, and because that was really the first one I ever did, and learned a lot about, you know, what is the investment world like? You know, what are they looking for? What are your milestones, and so on. Being involved with BIP, I also, you know, learned a little bit more about how you go from a university invention to the private sector, what's involved, you know, licensing agreements back with the university, you know, how you get the thing started. And in our case, we were actually part of a group called Springboard, which it's morphed into something different. But what that did was it allowed OHSU to invest in our company and get us incorporated in the state of Oregon. So they paid for all the incorporation fees, the lawyer fees, and so on. And in return, what they did is they took a certain percentage of our equity, which was like 15% at the time, of which 1% they gave to my former postdoc, who was named as an inventor on one of the things we were trying to commercialize. And so they gave us essentially 3 exclusive licenses and said, okay, you know, now go fly. So we ran as fast as we could. The thing that really helped, though, at the beginning was our next step after that, which was we pursued small business grants from the NIH, so SBIR, STTR. And what that allowed us to do is to self-fund with non-dilutive funding. And we just lucked out. I mean, we got $1.5 million SBIR grant over 3 years, which allowed us to hire me, hire a CEO, hire a chief staff scientist at the PhD level. And so by the end of that 3 years, we had actually developed this diagnostic test, had found a contract manufacturer to make it, and, you know, thought we were ready to go sell this across the world until, you know, we had a little problem with our strategic partner. But, you know, up until that point, you know, we were flying. You know, if all that had worked out and our business arrangements had worked out, you know, we'd have been making revenue prior to FDA clearance, and big revenue. I mean, some of the numbers we were looking at were in the millions. So, you know, that was the takeoff ramp was really pretty good at the beginning. It just sort of, you know, hit the wall midway.
You're describing every startup ever, right? So anyone who's ever had a startup will know that there's fits and starts and pivots.
Right.
I wanted to just give, I'm trying not to talk as much as I'm letting the panelists talk, but I want to also highlight the Advantage Accelerator program that my startup went through. I am a co-founder of a startup with a faculty member at Oregon State University. And our team went through the Advantage Accelerator. She went through the first part of it, which was kind of like training you a little bit about what it means to have a business. And then I came in on the second component of it. And we've been able to get several actually equity investments, but it's low equity from the state fund related to that. And they got to know us there. It springboarded us into something called the I-Corps program, which was a 7-week customer discovery sort of accelerator, for lack of a better word. It's not technically, I would probably say I-Corps is kind of like an accelerator. It's really a customer discovery focused. So they put us through the paces, made us go out and talk to 100 people in the course of 7 weeks about, you know, finding out what their processes in terms of like how they're thinking about what it is that we're wanting to bring to market without actually asking, is our baby ugly, which is, I think, one of the hardest things for startups to do, right? Don't you love what we're doing? Yeah, we love it. Are you going to invest in it? Are you going to buy it? No, but it's great. And I think that's one of the things that startups suffer from it in that regard. You brought up a great point. Candice, you were bootstrapped prior to taking on equity from the Global Insurance Accelerator. Dave, you were grant funded entirely prior to coming into the dojo. Can you speak a little bit about how an accelerator, which is often the case, is your first equity investor and what that meant for as you said before, Candice, like the external validation from the investment community, and did you get introduced into investors within your program?
Oh yeah, absolutely. If an accelerator program isn't making introductions to people, whether they're writing checks at that point or not, if they don't do that, then that's not the right program ever. Obviously, in my opinion. So yes, having institutional capital is massive. It is a validation point for any company to be able to say, I bootstrapped, I have SBIR or non-dilutive funding, and I have an institutional investor on my cap table. And again, this circles back to a little bit what Dave was saying. It's marketing, it's positioning. What we're trying to do is de-risk a very risky gamble. And by saying, oh, look, an accelerator not only brought us into a cohort and is training us up, but they invested their capital into us and they're making introductions, that is de-risking, particularly to angel investors who are your likely next step. And I don't know if you want Dave to answer that, but at some point I want to talk about the importance of geography in selecting accelerators as well.
Yeah, Dave, do you have any other thoughts? And then I'll let Candice go on the geography. So I think that's great.
There was actually one thing that came up in the chat. It was a question from Gene. Does SBIR take equity or ask for IP rights? Absolutely not. And in fact, if you go to the NSF SBIR website, it says right up front, we give you up to like $1 million in equity. Or $1 million in capital, we take 0% equity. That's their big push. So, NSF, NIH, DOD, they all have these SBIR programs. There's actually 11 agencies that have that. They're all federal agencies that have big external grant programs. And Doug Kawahara just corrected me, and I forgot. The BIP program is actually through Oak Tree, the Oregon Clinical and Translational Research Institute at OHS, not the tech transfer department.
I think it was founded I think that tech transfer decided to sort of support that because they wanted to see more. So I know that there's a strong partnership, but you're right. It's a part of a separate group. And what they're trying to do, just like OSU with their Advantage Accelerator, they're trying to accelerate more technology out of the university. And it's really hard to do because it's a big lift to do a startup. And it's a bigger lift when you're taking scientific and technical components and trying to figure out the business side of it, which is usually out of the comfort zone for most scientists and engineers that are inventors. And so like surrounding them with the support system that's needed in order to make that happen. Do you want to speak to the geography component, Candice, about where you do the accelerator, or if it's virtual or in person or all of those things? Yeah.
Well, it's always all of those things now. So Portland, Oregon, we have programs that accelerate or incubate or are focused on helping startup ecosystems, but there isn't, to the best of my knowledge, a locally based accelerator that also puts big capital, $50K or even $25K into your company. So if that is something that you are looking for, and you want introductions to investors to long-term fund your company, or introductions to customers who aren't based in the Pacific Northwest, you're going to need to go outside of Oregon. It's unfortunate, but I have known all along that the majority of any institutional capital that's going to come into caregiving is not going to be local. We don't fit the local thesis. So I would encourage, people to think about where is the money that is coming into your field, right? Not just the obvious, New York, Boston, the Valley. There are hubs coming up all over the country that have, for example, Aging 2.0, Louisville Healthcare Council, Louisville, Kentucky. They are trying to make a play as a startup hub for longevity. They've got Anthem, they've got United Healthcare, they've got Kindred Health, all putting big money into an accelerator program. So right then and there, you've got investors, you've got customers, but it's not Portland. So you have to go there or do a hybrid approach. But that's where the money is for that niche. So I would encourage people who are participating in this webinar to think about where your customers located and maybe look for programs there. If you are fluid yourself, I know that Milwaukee, Wisconsin, they incentivize startups to relocate. They have funds specific for companies that will come in. You get tax advantages. Obviously, they're trying to create a hub there. And, I think everybody on the call will do what it takes to make their startup successful. So just think that through when you are looking at programs. Charla, your program is outside of Portland too.
It is. And I was just going to brag just for a moment about the fact that we funded 4 Oregon and 3 Washington startups within our first 2 cohorts, which is unheard of. And guess what would not have happened unless I knew these companies beforehand. And that's something that I want to bring up as well, which is you need to typically get introduced to an accelerator by somebody who's referring you in, or at least, just like anything else, it's kind of a numbers game. We see a lot of startups that send us their pitch decks, and if they're coming through a channel that's a trusted other investor, maybe an angel investor or an advisor or whatever that is, that's always going to weigh a lot of weight. So if you find an accelerator that you want to get into, one of the other ways would be to reach out to a cohort company and ask them about their experience. And, like I mentioned before, but see if you can find a way, somebody that knows the people that are talking and admitting, because I got to tell you, and this is probably a secret that you don't know unless you've raised institutional capital. I won't say who they are, but there's companies in our accelerator right now that wouldn't be there if I hadn't championed them. Meaning they're kind of on the bubble. There's some that are just like, oh, everybody wants to do this one, of course. And then there's some that are like, well, maybe they're, and so you typically need an internal champion often, especially if you're coming from outside of the traditional areas. But Expert Dojo is actually a global accelerator. So we have a company from Mexico, one from Africa in our cohort, one that's based Seattle/Canada. So, that's another experience that you can have. And maybe you guys can speak to this, because I think this is one of the last questions that I'd love to get answered is like, what did you learn from your other participants? What kind of relationships did you take out of not just from the programming of your accelerator, but with your cohort, for example?
Yeah, so both of my accelerator programs were in person. So you do really bond with the companies that are in your cohort. A smart accelerator doesn't create competition, right? There might be similar enough companies, similar stage, similar thought, but and it may just be that one of my skill sets is connecting, but I am still in touch with the majority of every member of my cohort. And if I am all of a sudden in St. Louis, and I know that that's where the CEO of Kiwi Tech is, not only will I reconnect with him, but he will make introductions and open doors into the community, because your classmates will, or your cohort mates will see you struggling. They will share, want to give, open doors and really you bond together through this experience. And so that is a way of expanding your network even more broadly. I mean, when you think about, say, a university experience, people may choose to go to a specific university because of the brand, but then all of a sudden they have classmates and they have friends that open doors all over the world. We participated in a program in Australia called Care Factor that I would have never learned about had a cohort company gone through it the month or the year before, who said, you should check it out. And so, they're your eyes and ears as well, because again, in the startup realm, you're trading a lot of social capital. Like, Charla, you may not invest in me, but you may say, hey, do you know anybody who is doing this? And I may. And so then I make an introduction and, beautiful things happen. And that happens reciprocal.
Well, and to be clear, how did you meet Katrina? You guys were in an accelerator or program together, or was that like you met her? Because I met her through you. And she's now in my accelerator. I mean, so that's like, I got introduced to someone several years ago by Candice as another female founder that was doing stuff in digital health. I kind of paid attention to her over time. She was in another accelerator, which will not be named, that she was not happy with. So I'm not going to throw names, but she decided to jump ship and come over to what it is that we're doing. But I met her through Candice originally. So she introduced me to this other startup and so.
Yeah. And, I was looking at some of the companies. So when I came out of the gate with Caregiven, I was pitching at digital health. And there are a lot of free opportunities. There are a lot of free accelerator programs out there to get, in the door, like a free 3-day weekend where they do recruit, they do have a cohort, but they don't give you anything and they don't take anything.
Yeah.
So I was presenting at a digital health situation like that. And the only companies that wanted to talk to me were non-health insurers. And so that's ultimately how I found my way to the Global Insurance Accelerator, is talking to a biz dev guy at Mutual of Omaha who was on the board of the Global Insurance Accelerator, who put in a call. And all of a sudden I pivoted from a digital health startup to an insurtech startup, and great things have happened since.
So 2 points. It looks like Farrell Fungi wants to know if there's accelerators you're considering if you create a product in the wellness industry. Please feel free to email me if you're in wellness and you have revenue. I don't know what your revenue is or what your growth is over month, but that's something that we would absolutely look at. Specifically the wellness is a little bit of a sidecar for us. We're willing to look at wellness and growth. I don't know of the others. Like, there's some that are very focused on digital health, some that are very focused on medical device. I'm not as familiar with a particular wellness oriented ones outside of the ones like Candice was speaking of, which is like longevity, which is kind of like a blanket wellness for people as they age. But I'm happy to help identify one or to see whether you might be a fit for the program that we run, because we do look at wellness related. And if you're in revenue, that's the key word for us, right? So like we typically want to see you already in revenue. Doug has a great point. And I think that this new upcoming angel conference that OEN is putting on in conjunction with OTRADI and Oregon Bio Association is a great place to start in building the angel network. One of the things that we're doing that we think is really important, Suncoast Ventures is actually starting something called Health Ventures University, where we're going to educate people who have healthcare backgrounds that have capital that they might want to invest about investing in life sciences, investing in healthcare, because they feel perfectly safe putting stuff into real estate, or they might think about angel investing, but they're a little nervous about this. But the great thing about those kinds of investors is that they actually have knowledge that's beneficial to founders, not just money to come to the table. And so we're getting ready to start a program for that, because we believe 100% that it's going to take not just capital, but really people who have the background and experience in healthcare and have capital to deploy as angels to continue moving forward. So I'll share more with the Otrati when that gets up and running. But I agree. It's Suncoast Ventures. And you can, if you add me on LinkedIn, you can find that. It is a VC firm that is led by myself and the managing director at Expert Dojo. And we're specifically focused on investing in healthcare follow-on at Expert Dojo. So,
and not to be plugging Expert Dojo because I didn't go through the program, but when you're looking at accelerator programs and you're looking at sort of the faculty or the leader, look for people who are operators like Charla, who know how to build a company, not just the, oh, you know, I was the 5th employee at Yahoo and now I'm a billionaire and I'm going to be part of an accelerator program. But when you find mentors and advisors who have been in the trenches and who can A, you know, acknowledge, and then B, help you validate, troubleshoot, and move through it. That's really important. And again, it's obviously that I skew towards more a niche specific accelerator program or one that's stage appropriate. But really look through the profiles of who you'll be learning from.
And I think that's a great point. And I also think, to your point, Candice, make sure that you understand who the investor that they're going to introduce you are, because there are some accelerators that are not industry specific, right? That will put you in front of like a whole demo day, and maybe 95% of those people are like crypto and fintech investors, right? So like, it's not going to be super helpful to you. So like, really dig deep. Like, it's really important for you to do your homework. I would say the average time from initial conversation to follow-up conversation to like people joining an accelerator, at least on my end, my experience has been at least like a month and a half. So, you know, it's a dating process, right? So you ask, you know, don't just make sure that you're asking questions and doing homework on, you know, what kind of value you're really going to get out of the program and what they're bringing to the table, because I think that's super important. The kind of help, and then the stage of company that you're at, and whether it makes sense for you at, you know, this stage, or maybe do you have the right team in place to take advantage of it? You know, kind of all of those things of like of decision-making process.
Yeah, I agree. And, you know, to Candice's point, you know, the introductions can be very important. I mean, just from our cohort at Dojo, you know, we were introduced to an Irish company that's in the wellness space. And, you know, we're talking to them about, hey, maybe our diagnostic could be used in your wellness program. And we were introduced on the investor days to somebody who has really deep connections to the whole Kaiser Permanente network. You know, so these are the kinds of things that you can get from an accelerator that just open doors for you.
Yeah. It sounds like we're getting close to time. Is there any last thoughts that anyone wants to share? Any last burning questions that you guys have about accelerators? Overall, I think they're amazing. And to be honest, I wish every startup had the opportunity to do an accelerator, if, you know, the right kind of accelerator at the right time, because I think it is tremendous in terms of the amount that it can do exactly what the name says. It can accelerate you forward, sometimes by years, depending on where you're at with your company. So,
yeah. Well, thank you, Charla. Thank you, Dave and Candice, for all of your experiences. And it is really enlightening to see what's all out there, what resources are out there for these startups, not just locally, but nationally, globally. There's just a huge amount of resources out there and different types of programs. And so this was very enlightening information for all of us. I'm going to put up a poll real quick, survey, post-program survey. And while you're filling that out, can everybody see that? Yeah, good. Okay, good. I want to give a shout out to a community partner, Pi PDX in Portland. They have a general business accelerator program that is accepting applications until March 14th. So I'll put a link to that in the chat. It's not healthcare specific, but it's something that you can check into. Let's see, I've got some people filling out the survey. I appreciate that. Thank you. We like to collect this information for our improvement of our programs. Thank you so much. We really appreciate all this information today. Thank you, Charla, for leading such a fun and interesting discussion, and for Candice and Dave for sharing all your experiences. And I love that your experiences were very different. You know,
yeah, they definitely.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's just been fascinating to hear about all the different ways that companies can boost their startups. So we really appreciate it. And thanks everybody for coming too.
Thank you all. Hopefully we'll be doing events in person soon.
Yes, we
I'm
hope so.
excited
And we
get
hope
back
to,
that.
yes, we are too. We hope to see you at an event soon, whether it be virtual or in person. Hopefully it will be in person soon. We appreciate you all coming and appreciate your support of the OBI.
Yeah, and feel free to reach out and add me on LinkedIn if you attended today. There's very few Charla Triplett, so if you search me, you'll be able to find me easily. So
Me too. I'm happy to give my opinion on anything.
Thanks so much. We appreciate it. Have a great day, everybody.
thanks, you too.
Bye-bye.